The familiar swivel chair beneath me gave a faint creak, as if protesting the man resting his feet on my desk. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The guy in a smoke gray suit, a crewneck t-shirt, and sneakers that probably cost close to $1,000 had made himself right at home, like the seat was always his. "We need a more modern direction, Julian. You get that, right? Everything's changing." His voice was steady, laced with smugness. The air in the room thickened, not from his words, but from what they implied. I nodded slowly. I understand. It wasn't the first time I'd heard phrases like fresh thinking, new approach, financial innovation. But this time, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a farewell. I had served as chief financial officer at Redstone Industrial for 14 years. When I joined, it was a modest mechanical manufacturer on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, operating 3 struggling plants. Now, we were present in 12 states, partnered with a major aerospace supply chain, and had been publicly listed on NASDAQ for nearly 3 years. I led Redstone through the 2012 energy crisis and the pandemic supply chain collapse, not with flashy PowerPoints, but with real data, clean books, and a no-compromise approach to transparency. Then Tyler Grant showed up. The new CEO, 38 years old, a Wharton grad with a resume full of inspiring startup failures. The board, desperate to refresh leadership, bet on him. He didn't come alone. He brought a crew of strategic innovation consultants. And within the first week, the tone in every meeting changed. A new slogan appeared on every document: disrupt to profit. I knew what was coming the moment he scheduled a one-on-one meeting with me. I'd done the same thing in the past, sat across from a veteran employee to deliver the clean, polite exit. "We're bringing in Anthony Burke to replace you," Tyler said, wearing that polite, practiced smile. "He's 30, gave the keynote at the Boston Finance Summit, and runs a blockchain finance channel with 200,000 subscribers." I stayed quiet, hand resting on a dark brown leather notebook. Eleanor's last gift before she passed. "The transition will take place in 2 weeks. Best to announce it at the next shareholders meeting." I nodded, not in agreement, but because I understood exactly how these decisions worked. It wasn't about incompetence. It was about optics. That afternoon, while the company gathered in the main hall to hear Tyler announce a new era of growth, I packed up my desk. 14 years. All of it fit neatly into one cardboard box. A few family photos, an IPO commemorative plaque, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for retirement. At the elevator, I ran into Claire, head of accounts payable, who had stayed up countless nights with me during audit season in our toughest years. Her eyes were red. "You don't deserve this, Julian." I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Everything has a cycle. Don't be upset." What I didn't tell her was this. 3 months earlier, I'd started seeing irregularities in the reports. Ever since Tyler arrived, vague vendor payments, strategic consulting fees with no deliverables, and the strangest of all, an entity called Nova Core Advisors suddenly appearing under tech investment expenses, racking up nearly $500,000 within 60 days. I hadn't spoken up, not because I was afraid. I was waiting. Because a real finance professional doesn't react emotionally. He reacts with proof. And after all these years, the most reliable voice isn't a person's. It's the numbers. That afternoon, I left Redstone like a shadow. No farewell, no send-off party. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing off a floor now branded with youth, innovation, and hollow ambition. But I didn't walk out empty-handed. For 4 months before Tyler played his hand, I had begun noticing cracks in the system I once built myself. At first, it was minor expenses labeled digital advisory, then vendor contracts that didn't exist in the bidding system. The amounts weren't massive, but the frequency was. I started downloading original reports, receipts, and e-invoices from the internal server. No one noticed. No one expected I'd do anything. I was Julian, the so-called man of the past. They assumed I'd lost my fire ever since Eleanor, my wife, passed away from a stroke 2 years ago. They were wrong. Her absence didn't make me weaker. It hardened my principles. Eleanor was the only one who ever told me, when others cut corners, you take the long road. They'll trip over themselves in the end. The last time I saw Tyler, he was in the 9th floor boardroom, gesturing dramatically while talking about real-time data analytics like it was some kind of holy grail. He was using buzzwords to cover up budget lines he didn't want anyone reading closely. 3 weeks ago, the name VanishLink Consulting started showing up in report after report. It wasn't in our approved vendor list. When I ran the tax ID and legal filings, the results came back empty. No real office, no staff, no website, just a P.O. box in Reno, Nevada. Stranger still, the first payment to VanishLink came just 3 days after Tyler casually mentioned a finance whiz based on the West Coast. Someone Redstone needed if we were serious about joining the Fortune 500. A week later, his name was formally announced, Anthony Burke. Coincidence? I used to believe in probability, but in finance, there's no such thing as coincidence when money starts changing direction. And I created a hidden spreadsheet, stored it inside a folder titled 2015 Tax Rate History. No one would think to open that. Each transaction encrypted, time-stamped, matched with approval emails, and cross-referenced with disbursements from IT, marketing, and the now dismantled product development unit. I discovered at least 5 companies had received funds from Redstone over the past 6 months, totaling nearly $8 million. Not one invoice detailed what service was actually provided. Worse, 3 of them were authorized by the same individual, Nathan Ellis, a name I didn't recognize. A quick LinkedIn search revealed something interesting. Nathan once served as strategic advisor for Tyler's failed startup 3 years ago. He had no doubts left. This wasn't clerical sloppiness. This was a system. Tyler wasn't just restructuring the executive team. He was siphoning assets, laundering Redstone's funds through shell companies disguised as digital transformation. I didn't tell Kevin. Didn't tell Claire, not legal. Instead, I bought a 2 TB encrypted external drive and began backing up every piece of evidence. Night after night, I checked and rechecked the data against our original books. I wasn't looking for a fight. I didn't want applause. I didn't need headlines. I wanted one thing, for the truth to surface at the right time in front of the right people. I thought of Eleanor each night as I closed my laptop. She once told me, "Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives like the wind, quiet but powerful enough to shake the whole foundation." I was waiting for that wind, and the first sign didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from laughter. That laughter came from the glass-walled conference room on the 8th floor, usually reserved for quarterly audit reviews, now suddenly renamed the Financial Innovation Hub set up by Tyler. One Monday afternoon, as I was reviewing the investment report for a plant expansion in Kentucky, I saw a group of unfamiliar faces walk into that room. Pale pink blazers, sockless loafers, phones constantly held sideways to film stories, and leading the group was a man in his early 30s, lightly curled hair, gold-rimmed glasses. "This is Hudson Slate," Tyler announced while passing by my office, his eyes skimming past me like I wasn't even there. "He's our new strategic consultant, an expert in unstructured financial model transformation." I'd never seen the phrase unstructured finance in any legitimate textbook, but I soon found out that Hudson Slate's contract was worth $320,000 for 6 weeks. No procurement approval, no open bidding, signed by Tyler and charged directly to the R&D budget. I asked procurement, they said it wasn't my concern. "Everything goes through the Chief Innovation Officer now." Talia Green. Talia, 34, was another of Tyler's recruits. Her official title was Chief Innovation Officer, but in practice, she acted as the gatekeeper before any report could reach the executive board. I sent 3 emails asking for budget clarification on Hudson Slate. All of them were rerouted for methodological reevaluation. 3 days later, I received a notice about a change in the reporting structure. All financial analyses, revised budgets, and expenditure approvals would now have to pass through the CIO's office before going to the CEO or board. That was the first hit. The second came more unexpectedly on a Friday afternoon. Tyler hosted an internal seminar titled, "Finance is no longer numbers, it's narrative." He stood in the center of the auditorium, lights bouncing off his open collar shirt, speaking confidently. We can't keep chaining ourselves to traditional figures. We need to reinvent the structure of accounting. The current system is outdated. I don't want reports. I want a living data ecosystem. I wasn't sure whether a living data ecosystem made year-end audits easier or harder, but I knew exactly what it meant. No more oversight on cash flow. After that talk, my office was moved to the 5th floor. The reason given: spatial restructuring for process optimization. At the same time, my access to the internal finance system was limited. I could no longer view transaction details from 2 departments, tech and innovation. A week later, I found an unclassified document in the Finance Public folder. Don William, Draft Flexible Financial Model, Do Not Share Outside FO Team. I opened it. My eyes ran over the lines. A series of budget charts with no currency listed, only percentage distributions. Expense categories had no department tags. And in the notes section, one sentence made me read it 3 times. Expenditures are auto-reclassified based on innovation priority and may not reflect actual costs. I closed the file, my palms suddenly cold. This wasn't a mistake. They were doing it on purpose. By the end of that month, a former colleague of mine, Luis, financial analyst, messaged to meet. We met at a small bar near Fort Pitt Bridge. He took a long sip and set his glass down, eyes heavy with concern. Julian, I've got to ask, have you seen payments tied to a company called Silverpine Group? I nodded. VanishLink, Hudson Slate, Silverpine. They're all connected. Why? Luis lowered his voice. I found out Silverpine's receiving money not just from Redstone, but also from another company Tyler used to consult for. Same bank routing number. Same registration address. I sat quietly. The puzzle pieces were locking in. What are you going to do? Luis asked. I replied softly, eyes still on my drink. Stay quiet just long enough for them to get comfortable. And when they stop watching, the truth will surface, one number at a time. Because I don't need to shout in a crowd. I only need to prove that what they call innovation is really a systematic disguise. And I already had a clear plan. That moment marked the start of my double life. One version of me, Julian, polite, silent in executive meetings, nodding as Anthony Burke droned on about flexible data models. The other version stayed up till 3 a.m. in my quiet apartment in Shadyside, tracking transaction codes like blood traces in a cover-up gone too far. Luis's meeting was the spark. After that, I dug deeper into every line of data from the past 6 months. Under labels like digital transformation and strategic governance, hundreds of thousands of dollars were funneled weekly into barely existent entities. One morning, using an old admin account that hadn't yet been disabled, I discovered a batch of invoices totaling more than $2.1 million for a project labeled AI Risk Modeling Platform. But no one in engineering could confirm receiving software or even a prototype. I couldn't do this alone, but I had to be extremely careful about who I trusted. I chose Ethan Wyatt. Ethan wasn't part of my old team, but he was the new head of internal audit. Quiet, always avoided company parties, and had already corrected multiple errors in Anthony's reports without ever leaving his name in the logs. I asked to meet him over lunch on a Saturday at a quiet book cafe where no one from Redstone ever went. I opened my laptop, turned the screen toward him. What do you see in this allocation line? Ethan squinted, scrolling through the fields. Market research expense shifted from operating to capital investment budget? I nodded. And this line? AI system testing costs, classified under current software maintenance? Exactly. I leaned back. They're building a closed loop of spending, misclassifying categories to legitimize cash movements through phantom vendors. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. How much do you already know? I know VanishLink is just the tip. I have a mapped chain that leads to 3 firms in Delaware, all linked to the same IP server Tyler used at his old startup. Ethan exhaled slowly. I've seen some of the same things, but I thought I was misreading it. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You weren't. The question is, what do we do now? We began building a private reconciliation system Just the two of us knew about it. Every transaction over 25,000 would be quietly backed up and encrypted by Ethan, then stored off-site on a secure server. In a decoy report email sent to the CIO's office, I embedded a coded phrase. It was our signal, confirmation that the numbers matched. 3 weeks later, by linking bank transaction codes to outbound shipment records, we identified at least 5 payments where no goods or services had ever been rendered. Yet every one of them had been signed off by Anthony, who had never worked with any of the departments supposedly involved. We discovered a scanned signature that had been reused 17 times across different contracts. The signature belonged to Gavin Reese, listed as the Chief Technical Officer of Silverpine Group. But there was no one by that name in the company database. And no, Gavin Reese appeared in any business tax records in the state of Pennsylvania. Ethan said quietly, "They're not just bending the rules. They created a fake person." I replied, calm to the point of coldness, "Which is why we need real evidence." I began extracting every suspicious transaction and building a timeline comparing signing dates, payment dates, and internal events like restructuring announcements, digital platform trials, and AI data expansions. Strangely, every new tech report coincided with a major payment to unidentified vendors. I understood exactly what they were doing, using internal announcements as a pretext to legitimize spending, funneling funds through shell companies, and altering documents, just fast enough to stay ahead of scrutiny. One night, after reviewing every transaction from the previous quarter, I sat in front of a black screen. The blinking white cursor asked if I wanted to save changes. I typed yes. Eleanor once told me, if you want to take down a corrupt system, don't chase the people, find the pressure point, the one place everything passes through. I had just found that point. They thought I was an outdated machine, silent and obsolete, but they forgot I still had an original hard drive, where the truth had never been erased, and I was ready to rewrite the entire operating system. 3 weeks after I left Redstone, the undercurrents began to stir. Not from me, but from those trying to bury me. The first time I heard the rumors was from Derek, an old colleague in the industry. He called and asked, "Julian, what happened at Redstone? I heard you left because of some serious errors in the last quarterly report. Is that true?" I stood motionless in my backyard, clutching a cold cup of coffee. "Who told you that?" "Someone from Redstone HR. They said you couldn't keep up with new tech and Burke had to redo the entire audit structure due to multiple discrepancies. You doing okay?" I didn't respond right away. They weren't just removing me. They were dismantling the credibility I had spent more than 30 years building. And they were doing it in steps, subtle, calculated, just like the way they rerouted money. No clear fingerprints, but ruthless results. That afternoon, I went to the city library to access some legal documents in peace. When I opened my mailbox, I found a thick envelope stamped with the logo of Goldner and Howard, the law firm Redstone had hired to handle internal matters. I opened the letter. I nearly laughed. A formal legal warning, coldly worded, citing the confidentiality clause in my old employment contract. It instructed me to cease and desist from transmitting or implying any unverified allegations, and included a reminder that any baseless statement damaging the company's reputation could result in legal action. No individual had signed it, just Redstone Legal Department. I set the letter aside, opened my laptop, and triggered a predetermined routine, transferring all stored files from my independent server to 3 separate locations. An encrypted hard drive at my brother's house in Michigan, a delayed cloud backup, and a hidden email account with an auto-send trigger after 72 hours of inactivity. They were forcing me into defense mode, but I wasn't going to play by their rules. I would choose the time, the place, and the weapon. That evening, I met Ethan Wyatt at a small bar north of town. He arrived late, pale, visibly tense. "They've started monitoring even personal email," he said quickly as he sat down. The entire audit team had to sign an extended NDA and were now required to report any outside system communication. "So they think someone's talking to me." "Not think. They know." Ethan pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of a message before deleting it. His review all original reports created by Julian. Focus on Q4. If discrepancies are found, forward to legal and prep internal statement. I handed the phone back. They're fabricating a reason to erase me from the company's history. Ethan nodded. And making sure anything you say now sounds like bitter retaliation. I leaned back, eyes drifting toward the rainy street outside. Can you still stay in this? It's tough, but I've backed up the original audits. All you need to prove is that the numbers lined up before Burke's team touched them. We parted quickly. Ethan returned to his post and I moved to the next phase. I emailed Brad Sullivan, CFO at one of Redstone's major vendors, a man I once helped out of a near-bankruptcy deal back in 2017. Brad agreed to meet the next day. We sat in his car, parked behind a hotel near the airport. Julian, I've always trusted you, but how deep is this? I haven't accused anyone, I said, handing him a USB drive. I just need you to check these contracts. Did you sign them? Did anyone from Redstone ever verify service items with your team? Brad plugged the drive into his laptop. His eyes scanned the files. His expression shifted by the second. None of these contracts match our records. These are internal docs. I don't recognize any of these names. I smiled faintly. So, someone's using vendor identities to legitimize the flow of money. Brad sighed and his face went cold. They think your silence means surrender, but I can see you've just been waiting. I nodded gently. They're staging a play to destroy my name, but I have the original script. And when the spotlight hits the stage, I won't be hiding in the wings. I'm not the type to plant bombs under the CEO's chair and wait for the explosion. I don't like noise, I believe in numbers, and when arranged correctly, they're louder than any microphone. During a remote audit one night, I remembered a system admin account created last year during our transition to a new audit software. Per policy, it was supposed to be deactivated once the setup was complete, but due to a pending migration, I had kept emergency access, an old habit I'd often been mocked for. It turned out to be the last remaining backdoor. I logged in. It felt like unlocking a basement in a building that had just been emptied floor by floor. Every financial transaction from the past 6 months was there. Thousands of rows, many tagged with cryptic labels. Project Dusk, Epsilon expansion phase, Delta Vision upgrade package. I knew none of them were real. After nearly 2 weeks of sifting through that mountain of data, I found a specific link. A trail of bank accounts tied to Orion Metrics LLC, supposedly an internal analytics partner for Redstone. But when I ran their federal tax filings, Orion existed only as an inactive entity, sharing the exact same registered address as another firm, Elmridge Advisory. The deeper I dug, the more names I uncovered, and they all shared the same legal representative, Reed Thatcher. I had never seen that name in any Redstone report. But when I checked Tyler's old startup, the one that made some noise before vanishing quietly, I nearly dropped my coffee. Reed Thatcher was listed as its general counsel. I started mapping the flow. From Redstone, funds were funneled out through so-called strategic partnership contracts, then broken down and routed to 3 intermediary companies controlled by Reed. From there, the money branched out to independent consulting entities, some registered overseas, mainly in Singapore and Malta. The network was woven tightly, like a locked door, but I had found the key. At the center of every transaction over $100,000 was one name, Northcrest Holdings, an investment firm rarely mentioned in Redstone's official documents, but holding 3 seats on the board. I rechecked the board member list. One name pierced my memory like a blade. Andrew Kellerman, 35, newly appointed to the executive committee earlier this year, and nephew of Charles Kellerman, the current chairman of Northcrest. It was all clear now. Tyler hadn't been hired. He'd been placed, like a chess piece, dropped at the right time, in the right spot, to open the gate for a large-scale siphoning operation, disguised as financial innovation. They thought I was the past, but my past was rows of numbers that couldn't be altered, principles that couldn't be bent, and logic no one could manipulate while I was still looking. I printed every document, not on my home printer, but at a service center over 40 miles from Pittsburgh. I sealed them in a brown file envelope, added a security QR code, and handed it to Thomas, a close friend who worked the law firm Fletcher & Myers, with one instruction: open it if I don't check in within 5 days. That night, I got a text from Ethan. Burke's reviewing all system access. Looks like they suspect someone's still inside. Keep your distance. I put the phone down and stared out the window, where the city lights blurred into the fog. I hadn't stepped into this game to win. I only wanted the truth not to be buried. But now every piece was in place, from Tyler to Burke, from Reed to Andrew, from Northcrest to Redstone. No longer isolated dots, a system, complete, deliberate, and terrifying. And I wasn't the only one who saw it anymore. When a system is exposed from enough angles, it runs out of places to hide. The counterattack had begun. And I wasn't fighting alone. That night, I triggered the contingency protocol I had set up 2 months earlier. A triple encrypted, auto-SN system linked to a real-time clock. If I didn't enter a confirmation code every 48 hours, all the files, cash flow breakdowns, legal entity maps, bank transfer records, and copies of questionable contracts would be simultaneously sent to 3 destinations: the SEC, the U.S. Department of Justice, and an investigative financial journalist I had worked with 7 years ago. I didn't fully trust any of them, but if all 3 got the evidence, none could afford to hide it. I stored a hard copy separately, full color, every page numbered, corners initialed, and placed it in the safe of a longtime friend who served as a judge in Ohio. He didn't know what was inside. I only told him, if anything happens to me, call this number. I gave him a prepaid burner phone, only to be powered on in emergencies. Next step, find the people who might still save the company, if they hadn't been bought or scared into silence. I sent 3 emails, exactly 21 minutes apart, no CCs, from a freshly created address, unlinked to any common provider. The recipients, 3 board members I believed still had a conscience. Eleanor McKay, 58, former CEO of a major electronics manufacturing chain, known for standing up to aggressive investors to retain control. Marcus Doyle, representing the Steelworkers Pension Fund, a man with a vested interest in transparency because thousands of retirees relied on Redstone's performance. And Franklin Yates, 74, the longest-serving board member. Soft-spoken, but legendary for old-school financial integrity, a mirror of me 15 years from now. In the email, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply wrote, during a review of past transactions prior to my departure, I identified systemic irregularities in spending tied to partners contracted after April. After comparing them with historical audit records, I believe these deals may not reflect actual business activity. I encourage you to independently review the matter before making strategic decisions related to expanding financial innovation. I attached a 3-page summary, clean, straightforward, no emotional language, listing the mismatched expenses, intermediary company names, and duplicate tax IDs, along with a link to a hidden server containing the full original data, password to be sent only if they replied. Powerful people don't change course because of threats or complaints. You have to give them a reason to care and to be afraid. My final move that night was reaching out to someone I never thought I'd contact again, Vanessa Lynn, former senior financial controller at Redstone, who had resigned 2 years ago after Tyler took over. I'd thought she left due to burnout, but a former coworker told me Vanessa had opposed the soft budget restructuring project early on and was isolated for it. We met at a nameless cafe in West Liberty. Vanessa was just as I remembered, composed, sharp, and direct. You want confirmation that the dual audit system is still running? I nodded. You helped me set it up in 2019. Every transaction over $50,000 auto-embacked to an independent third-party server, right? It's still active, but access is restricted, unless the original admin still has the root key. I pulled out a small aluminum encryption token and tossed it onto the table. This will unlock temporary access and allow a full 6-month backup. Vanessa studied me for a moment. Do you have a plan? I'm not trying to bring anyone down. I just want to preserve what the company used to be. But if they keep going, it'll collapse on its own. She nodded, smiling faintly. Then let me help keep this door open a little longer. By the time I left the cafe, night had fully settled in. Street lamps flickered through the mist-covered trees. My nerves were gone. Only one thing remained clear. All my exits were already burned. But I had laid enough groundwork for every way forward, and if the people I contacted chose to respond, the gears of justice would start turning. Not for me, but because Redstone deserved a different ending. On Monday morning at 7:43 a.m., I got a text from Bethany. It said, "Midden, no turning back now." I didn't reply right away, just stared at the screen, hand tightening around my coffee mug. Bethany had been a mid-level audit manager, one of the last holdouts from my time at Redstone Finance. Though she wasn't involved from the start, she'd quietly tracked the irregular structural changes Anthony's team had been pushing. Last week, after confirming the dual audit system was still running and that all transactions over $50,000 were still being auto-archived on an external server, I'd sent Bethany a sealed envelope. Inside was a summary of red flags she could present to internal audit, along with a legally sound rationale to file a formal complaint without breaching her employment agreement. Once submitted, Redstone's financial transparency charter required internal audit to open a preliminary investigation within 48 hours. And if they found any evidence of systemic misconduct, they were obligated to call in independent auditors. At 9:05 that morning, Redstone's internal email system pinged with a message. The audit department will conduct a reassessment of financial transactions related to strategic vendors contracted in Q2 and Q3. During this investigation, all spending decisions under the innovation budget will be temporarily suspended. At the same time, the chain reaction I had set in motion began to unfold. Franklin Yates was the first to respond to the email I sent 2 days earlier. He called me directly from a landline, leaving no trace. "Julian, I've seen it. I'm not surprised, but I am shocked at how sophisticated they were." "What will you do?" I asked. "I have forwarded it to Eleanor and Marcus. We're planning to call an emergency session." I hung up without another word. In this kind of game, if you plant the right seed, the storm takes care of itself. Tuesday afternoon, Bethany texted again. "It's moving. Anthony just got pulled into a private meeting. Legal is in the room too." 15 minutes later, the internal system pushed another announcement. "Mr. Anthony Burke will temporarily step down from his role as Chief Financial Officer to assist in the investigation. All financial approvals will now be handled by the senior executive team." I waited until exactly 6 p.m. before sending the next update to Eleanor McKay. This time, a detailed comparison between the internal audit reports and data from the parallel tracking system. The discrepancies totaled several $1,000,000, and most notably, they all traced back to a decision signed by Tyler in March, the resolution to launch Phase 1 of Strategic Financial Transformation. Wednesday morning, another internal announcement was released. The chairman of the board has approved a special meeting at 2 p.m. today with the presence of independent auditors and forensic accounting experts. Redstone hadn't held a session like this in over a decade. At 2:27 p.m., Bethany messaged, "Tyler stayed silent in the meeting." Anthony was taken out halfway through, escorted by 2 people from the audit firm. Eleanor ordered a halt to the entire flexible budget expansion project. Marcus proposed a review of Northcrest Holdings' voting rights. I sat in my quiet apartment, looking at the cash flow map on my screen, smiling. Not with satisfaction, but with timing. At 6:41 p.m., Redstone's internal network issued a company-wide notice. Mr. Tyler Grant will temporarily step down from his executive role to address recent concerns related to financial approval procedures. In the interim, the executive committee will be led by the acting general counsel. Simultaneously, Tyler and Anthony's high-level access privileges were revoked. It didn't end there, but the truth could no longer be buried. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony, where streetlights filtered softly through the damp trees. I didn't feel victory, nor revenge, just a deep, quiet certainty. The only thing that never betrays you is the numbers, if you know how to let them speak. I wasn't at Redstone headquarters the morning the audit committee presented their preliminary findings. I didn't need to be. The report was 112 pages long, with nearly 700 pages of backup documentation and cash flow reconciliations, presented to the full board, federal legal representatives, and the SEC's independent investigative team. I received a copy by mail. No thank you, no gold seal, just a handwritten note at the bottom of the last page. You were right. They couldn't hide it. FOS. 3 weeks later, the federal case was officially opened. Tyler Grant was indicted for deliberately falsifying financial statements and using shell entities to siphon development funds. Anthony Burke was charged as an accomplice and for falsifying internal documents. Reed Thatcher, the man behind the shell network, was arrested in Nevada while trying to purchase a flight to Malta. 3 board members with financial ties to Northcrest Holdings were forced to resign. One of them was charged for knowing about the misconduct and failing to report it. I never appeared in the media. I declined every interview request from both journalists and financial institutions. Instead, I spent my time assisting the independent audit team in analyzing historical data, restoring Redstone's internal controls, and implementing a new system of transparent reporting. I did it all as an independent technical advisor, exactly as stated in my contract, with a consulting fee generous enough to ensure I'd never have to worry about money again. I didn't take back my old job. I didn't want to. A month after my consulting ended, I drove northwest across the Allegheny Mountains and stopped in a small town in southern New York, where Eleanor and I once dreamed of buying land, but never had the chance. I found an old cabin nestled among maple trees, its loft overlooking Keuka Lake. The former owner, a retired man, left the original wood interiors untouched. I bought it without bargaining. It wasn't perfect, but it was quiet, a rare luxury I'd never known in my life in finance. Each morning, I wake at 6, make coffee, open Eleanor's old notebook, and read a few of the notes she left about retirement dishes to try. I try cooking them, never quite capturing the flavor she described. But that was never the point. One early autumn afternoon, as I sat on the porch, a message came from Bethany. They officially appointed me CFO, first internal promotion in 20 years. The new CEO is Eleanor McKay. We're keeping the parallel audit system. Thank you for believing in me. I replied, you proved it yourself. Just remember, every number needs a witness. The SEC closed the case after Redstone agreed to sweeping transparency reforms, repayment to affected funds, and a clear assurance that no employees or shareholders would bear the cost. No one was fired, except those who should never have been hired. In the small room behind my cabin, I set up a simple office and took on the books for 3 local nonprofits, a domestic violence recovery center, a youth reentry program, and a small church that couldn't afford an accountant. I work for free. When they ask why, I say, I used to do finance to keep the numbers right. Now I do it to keep my conscience clear. My life never had a grand explosion. No standing ovation. But I know I've come full circle. From small family business to corporate empire. From suspicion to clarity. From defamation to restored honor. On the last evening of the month, I cleaned the back porch and opened the old wooden box where Eleanor once kept handwritten letters. The first page had a line she wrote 15 years ago. If one day you must choose between staying silent to stay safe and speaking up to stay true, remember, the only person you must live with for the rest of your life is yourself. I folded the letter and placed it back in its spot. On the table was a copy of Redstone's final report, white cover, no dramatic title, just a small line, Special Financial Report, Q4. The first page contained a note of thanks to the individuals who upheld principle during the company's hardest days. No names listed, but I knew. I didn't need them to say it. I've always known who I am, and why I can't look away when the numbers are twisted to serve greed. Julian Carter's story is proof that integrity never goes out of style. In a world where innovation is too often used as a mask for corruption, he held firm to one core value: let the numbers speak. Slandered, pushed out, and betrayed, Julian didn't strike back with rage, but with the truth, quiet, precise, and undeniable. In the end, he didn't just save a company, He preserved the honor of an entire career built on honesty. What do you think about Julian's choice? Is steady silence or loud resistance the right path? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories that explore family, character, and life.